Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas. We're coming to you from Mount Soma in the mountains of western North Carolina, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple. Today's podcast is entitled, Am I Living in a Box? Are you? Are we all? The idea for this podcast kind of came about in a strange way. I was talking to somebody, PhD in physics, brilliant guy. And he was talking about why physics is so great is because it's eternal. You know, those laws will exist forever, and physics is physics, and that will never change. And I understand that, I understand what he's saying, but the thing is, there's just so much more, so many more different paradigms, so many different worldviews. And it just seems like every culture, every society throughout history, they've all had their, I'm trying to get Adrienne on here. I think she's on.
I'm on.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's good, Adrienne. They've all had their world, like the Vikings, as far as the Vikings were concerned, they knew they had a name for God, and that was the real God. And the Romans, same way, ancient Greeks, Egyptians, every culture, every society. And they have a worldview, be it that physics is going to rule, or that it's all about, yin and yang, or it's all about the five elements. And that's it. You either speak in that language, speak in those terms, agree with that kind of thinking, or you're just wrong, So I thought I'd do a podcast on that, and then I started thinking about it, and I associated it with Vedic Science, Vedic Architectural Science, Sapatya Ved, also called Vastu Science. Vastu means fence. It means container, box, And the idea then is, even if you go deeply into the knowledge of the nature and structure of existence, it's all about boxes and things being contained, defined. I'm not going to go way deep into that science in this podcast, though I have in my lectures and classes at times. But basically, there is no thing. It's a field of pure isness, pure consciousness. The ancient rishis told us that, and shamans, and it comes from all over the place, ancient knowledge, even modern physics now, the superparticle, But consciousness, then, when it becomes conscious of itself, it views it as other, puts it in a box. And so then the whole manifestation of existence is all about the self-interacting dynamic, the limitation, the boundaries imposed upon unboundedness, I'm not going to say much more about it in that way in this podcast, though that really does explain and define how we function as human beings, how we think, how we behave. When I talk about this, I also had the thought that, it might become a little polarizing or limiting or, defining, classifying different mentalities. And I don't mean to do that, but what I do mean to do is give us all an insight into how we function. And it doesn't make it wrong either. That's a whole other lecture about the value of cultures, that a healthy culture cultures and develops the awareness. So it's not about abandoning our cultural integrity. Quite the contrary, it's about making the culture healthy and conforming to the integrity of that culture, because that's going to be a thing that's going to evolve the whole civilization, the whole society, and us as individuals. But what is important is that we have a healthy relationship with that. Now, we could go right to Vedanta, the deepest knowledge. And Vedanta then too, it's, you can take Vedanta and Vedantic knowledge and put it in a box, and then it's not really real Vedanta anymore. Because really Vedanta, all knowledge really, especially deep knowledge, is ultimately about seeing beyond those boundaries, seeing beyond those limitations, particularly Vedanta. So though we function through limitation, because we're in the relative, that's what relative means. Enlightenment, if you will, is about functioning through those limitations without losing our self, and self with a capital S there, our deeper self, to those limitations, So what it boils down to is a very odd thing in a way in the world, because just because you're a great enlightened being doesn't mean you're not functioning through. If you're on the physical plane, you're functioning through confinement, through limitation. At the same time, you're seeing beyond it. You're living in a place that's beyond it. And by virtue of that, you can have these very profound, very passionate convictions, and at the same time see the futility in it. And that's not an attitude. It's not a philosophy. You can't say, oh, yeah, okay, I get that. So now I'm practicing Vedanta. No. We're talking about a state of physiology, spiritual liberation, freedom of awareness, you see? So before we get any further into that, I wanted to say last week was Memorial Day, and I was going to make a comment at the end of the podcast about it, and I forgot. And somehow maybe it's even more relevant to what we're talking about today. I don't know, in a sense. Because I was watching the news, and they interviewed some guy off the street, and he was saying that he doesn't believe in Memorial Day. Memorial is a bad thing because the military is so bad, and on and on like that. And I see his point. I mean, that's a box, and I can understand that box. And what that box, talks about is the military-industrial complex and government's involvement, and of the money, by the money, for the money, and masters of war, that whole kind of thing. And he's right about that. But at the same time, there's our heroes, our people who gave their lives in a very pure, noble, altruistic sense to their country, to their nation. Now, everything has a high end and a low end of the mandala. It's like a circle, and I get into the structure and nature of mandalas to a great extent too in my lectures. But having said that, there's a noble, high, laudable value to a nation, and there's also the low end, and that's true of everything. And so in the military, there's the high end. These people, I mean, I have such respect for the real, true hero of the military, somebody who's passionately dedicated to the nobility, to the high end of the mandala of what their nation means and the spirit of it. And that's why I really respect that one expression that we talk about in America, to form a more perfect union. I mean, right in there, it's built in the idea that there's a humility to it. We don't really know exactly what it will look like, but we're aspiring to that. We're striving for that. We're pointing in that direction. And the real military heroes, the people really dedicated to things like honor, integrity, dignity, what are the words they use, Adrian, in the military?
Respect, camaraderie.
Yeah. Just those laudable goals that sometimes are just even mocked in today's world,
And
to
Michael,
serve and protect,
serve and protect. Yeah.
And you also think that all these like heroes or the guys that were actually in they didn't go to war because they were told to go. You know what I mean? They had to go, and whether they liked it or not, they were put in that situation and had to do something.
Well, it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because is it the masters of war that are doing it for material gain and for power or whatever, that's directing them, or is it some great enlightened seer that's, Lord Krishna was a kshatriya, he was a warrior, and so the question becomes: is it what this guy was talking about in that interview, that it's a military-industrial complex? Or is it a laudable goal, a noble purpose that's going to serve the people, protect and serve, like Adrian said, And so the point is that in Memorial Day, we do well to feed the noble aspect and not to get caught up in the lower end of the mandala,
Yeah.
It's not to live in denial, but it's to at least one day of the year praise those guys who gave their lives. And now, today, June 6th, June 6th, 1944, Normandy, look at, it's amazing to me. I mean, people really gave their lives in dedication to protect and serve not only our nation, but Europe. But see, then it gets now we're starting to talk about boxes, because all the different militaries, the Japanese, the Germans in World War II, they're all protecting and serving. But the question then becomes, what kind of box are they in? And then you can even think of the Bolshevik Revolution, in Russia. They had everybody convinced the Tsar was this terrible guy, and I'm not saying he was a great guy. I don't even know, really. Even though recently, I guess the Christian church made them saints, him and his family. But at any rate, now we know that the people behind the Bolshevik Revolution were banks in the United States, in Germany, I forget where else. I think it was Brazil, I can't remember. To make money. They took over the economy of Russia. And that was the underlying motivation behind the whole thing. And so now we can take a look at the world today and our society today in this context. And I think it helps us to see beyond the limitations of our own thinking. And there are just so many examples of this. For example, and I know I'm getting into an area here where people are going to get upset either way, I don't know, but just as one example, and forgive me if I'm stepping on toes here, but the whole idea of, transsexual males being able to compete in girls' sports and in women's sports. And I mean, I've even heard that some of these, and it's even becoming the law, I guess, in some areas where these guys are completely physically intact males, but they just consider themselves female, and they're allowed to compete in women's sports. And how devastating it is for a lot of these people, these women and these young girls that, they dedicate so much of their time and effort, and they're so passionate and committed that there's no way they're going to win. I understand recently in a powerlifting contest, it was a male that decided he was female that won the competition. Help me. If somebody can understand and give me insight into that. I mean, am I living in a box here, or, I'm trying to be at least trying to understand, but for the life of me, I can't understand it, and that's just one example that I think most of us would consider rather extreme. But also the whole thing about the coronavirus, and now all this is coming out about Fauci, and evidently a lot of what he was saying on other emails coming out that are just proving that he didn't really believe it. He knew masks, for example, weren't effective. He knew that vaccinating children was unnecessary. But now we get into the whole arena of the medical industrial complex. Vaccinating children when we know that they don't get the disease, or if they do, it's essentially nothing. And even the statistics have been tweaked. So there are way fewer people are dying of the virus than is reported. But then again, you look at India, and in India, I mean, it's a big problem. So, but what's the truth, and what should we really do? And are we all, be made fools of to wear these masks that now they're saying don't work? And the whole thing, and again, I brought this up some time ago about hydroxychloroquine, and I got a lot of negative response to it, But there's so many physicians now that are coming out that swear by hydroxychloroquine is a tremendous cure for people who are coming down with the coronavirus, and these huge reversals, and from practically on their deathbed to being fine. And so then the claim, and again, these are all boxes that are arguing. My box is right, your box is wrong. And let's keep in mind that that's the context of this whole podcast. Because is it the medical industrial complex that now came out with these vaccines, put a bunch of money into them? They can make money on the vaccines, but you don't make any money on hydroxychloroquine because it's generic at this point. It's been around for 100 years, And you certainly can't get to the truth through the news, I saw a thing on the news today, there's this whole thing about the election for president, and how a lot of people are seeing it was fake. And then there's these computers, and evidently there's evidence, and I say evidently, there's evidence that, the whole thing was a fraud, I'll tell you, if you want to watch, I mean, it's almost hard to watch the news now for me. But if you want to watch the news, I would strongly encourage you to watch different channels. Don't just stick with one, because one channel says that, oh yeah, election fraud, and there's an attorney, what's her name, Sidney Powell. She has all this proof, and she's saying that the election is going to get reversed and Trump is going to be president in August. And then you turn to the next channel and they say, oh, they're claiming the election was a fraud, but obviously that's not true. And these are both news stations, Now, I imagine that a number of people listening to this, either about hydroxychloroquine or the election or the transsexual thing and or whatever, I'm sure I've pushed a lot of buttons. But my question is, am I living in a box? Are you living in a box? Are we all living in a box? How many different boxes are there? How many different identities are there? And can we see beyond our own box? And look how passionate we get, particularly these days, it seems, in opposition to people that aren't sharing the same box with us that we're living in. Even going back to physicists. I mean, I love physics. I was a physics and math major in undergrad, passionate about it. But I'll tell you, I talk to physicists now, and so many of them are just so confined to a little box they're living in. And the very idea that there could be whole realms of physics and science that they have no idea about, or that the conclusions they've drawn, particularly in the arena of modern physics, that are ultimately not true, you know, and the passionate rejection of those things, you know. And then the whole thing about, well, we could even get into the whole subject of racism. And what do they call that? The, oh, shucks, the, something racist, CRP, what is that? I'm spacing out right now.
Are you thinking of the
Critical race theory, that's it.
theory?
Oh.
CRT, yeah. That actually, if you look at the history of it, was originally called critical theory, and they just kind of stuck the word race in, because evidently now, see, race becomes a buzzword that people can use to charge any subject. And so all of a sudden, it's not about, like President Biden said recently, ISIS isn't the threat. Al Qaeda is not the threat.
Racist.
Yeah, white supremacy is the threat. You know, and I'm not. I don't even want to get into that as so much as to say that all of a sudden now we got a card that we can play that just gets people stirred up. And even like with Black Lives Matter, I remember when I first heard Black Lives Matter. This goes back years. I was like, well, all lives matter. And it was actually my teenage daughter, she was a teenager at the time, she explained to me that the point is that some people don't feel like Black Lives Matter as much. And I saw, oh, okay, I get that. Yeah, well, that's not right. You know, all lives matter. And certainly Black Lives Matter. And if we need to affirm that Black Lives Matter, then that's a good thing. But now there's a guy who just recently, I don't know if you've seen this, he was a Black man who was a leader of the Black Lives Matter movement, and he quit. And he's very negative about the Black Lives Matter movement now. He said that it's not about Black lives. They don't care about Black lives. It's more of a radical Antifa type of an attitude. And they're just in it to push an agenda. And again, they just throw the word blacks in there, and all of a sudden they get a big following, and they get a lot of support, and they're made a lot of money, you know. But these are just, again, please hear me, I'm not taking a stand. I'm just trying to give us a feeling for the idea of what kind of box we're living in. And then, see, but that too is a balance, because like, take a look at what's going on with religion. We criticize different religions, and oh, that's another box, might be the attitude. But so like I say in my lectures, it's not about the thing. It's about your relationship with the thing. And as we understand, we become more wise. Humility is the flip side of wisdom. And so our religions, if they're honored and held properly, become a gateway to wisdom, a great gateway to real spiritual growth, spiritual liberation, functioning within the confines of our culture, our upbringing, our heritage. All those things can support life, but without losing ourselves to a fanaticism around that religion, for example, around those belief systems. And we're just not seeing that much of that today. Where's the wisdom? Where's the understanding? Where's the humility? Like even the very subject of racism, I say that racism is cultural integrity gone insane. I mean, cultural integrity can be a good thing. I think it's very natural, you know, the birds of a feather flock together. But now even in the educational system, isn't there an attempt to eradicate any cultural integrity, the family unit, and don't listen to your parents. The educational system is no longer about education. It's about indoctrination into a particular set of beliefs defined by a particular box. That's not education, that's indoctrination. And what we're doing is we're sterilizing the integrity of the different cultures, the different upbringings, the different family units, social units, cultural units. And really, it all comes, I think, from an unhealthy relationship of the box that we live in. Now, box, you're living in a box, and whether they say, oh, live outside the box, that all gets so confused, and we kind of tend to throw out the baby with the bathwater in that instance, or we become so fanatical about the box we're living in that we can't see the bigger picture of the true nature of it. Cultural integrity ceases to be cultural integrity and is viewed as racism, for example, But there's good news here. And that is that the whole thing now, if you just watch the news, I mean, to me, and I think to most people, what's going on is insane. I mean, the whole thing has just gotten so crazy. Let's print trillions of dollars to save the economy. I mean, anybody with a very basic understanding of economics knows that just makes money worth less, makes it worth less eventually.
Worthless.
What's that?
Worthless.
Yeah.
Worthless.
Yeah, exactly. So the good news is that we are in a phase transition now. Why? Because people are, and I think they're on the verge. We've had it. This is ridiculous. The way that the world is going and stuff, it's not working. We need to take a step back. There's so much tension built up between these identities with limitation that the whole thing is going to shift. Tensions, when they build up and they get intense enough, sooner or later they decompose. The tension can't be held. They break down. And that's going to be a good thing. And there's so many predictions I've talked about, the Jyotish, numerology, Lord Krishna saying the Mother Divine 5,000 years ago. And now there's also this thing that's out there about, you can Google it if you want, the photon, what is it called? The photon belt, right? That the Earth now is moving through a photon belt. And the last time we did that, I've heard some say 44,000 years ago. I've heard some say 100,000 years ago. We might just be into a whole new age thing and it's all bogus. I don't know. But the point is, you know how you treat fish? I'm a veterinarian. If you got sick fish, you know how you treat the fish? Is you just dump the antibiotic in the water. And like that, what water that the fish are living in goes a long way in determining their level of health. And that's true with human beings too. But we don't live in water per se. We live in an atmosphere. And be it a photon belt, or I've heard asteroid belt, or just the climate. There was a saint that I knew who once said that if people just lived in a pure climate, they could get enlightened very quickly. But a big obstacle is that we're just living in a polluted world. And I don't just mean polluted because of carbon emissions, though that's a form of pollution, but I mean psychologically, psychically, psychodynamically polluted as well. You see, we're affected by all of those things. So these are just things to think about, and I hope we can reflect upon them in a manner that's, well, I guess I could say one way, open-minded. In another way, I'm inclined to say humble, like even the idea about fossil fuels. People want to get rid of fossil fuels. Yeah, I'm for a clean environment, absolutely. And yeah, fossil fuels pollute. But if we were just to eliminate fossil fuels, no, that means no airplanes for one. And then, so it just doesn't make sense. What we need, I think, every huge advancement, if you think about it, every huge advancement in a society and a culture has been founded upon a technological advancement. Computers, industrial age, the wheel, electricity, it's all technological advancements that really thrusted society forward. And so we would do well, I think, to put more time into research and development before we just eliminate fossil fuels and try to rely on solar energy or something. The technologies are out there. But, trying to not teach our children mathematics because we feel like it's racist. I mean, a lot of the technological advancements are going to be in science, in engineering, and physics, dependent upon mathematics, so we're kind of pulling the rug out from under ourselves by doing that, And again, I understand the mentality, but we have to think, defunding cops. I heard in Asheville, North Carolina, just an hour away from here, less than that. Recently, I think there are only probably 150, 200 police officers in the whole force. Recently, I heard 72, it might have been 82, I can't remember, of the police officers resigned because the whole thing is just so crazy. The whole defund police. They're just fed up. They're leaving. And what kind of state does that leave Asheville in? And I also heard that now there's a new movement in Asheville. I don't know how far this is true. That if somebody breaks into your house, if somebody breaks into your house, if you were to shoot them, you can be convicted. Now, that I can, in a way, I guess you'd have to look at the circumstances for sure, but just as a blanket statement, I think that's a little disconcerting, at least, something that needs to be looked at, I would think. All right, well, at any rate, I think this gives an idea of living in boxes. It's not about getting out of the box you're living in, because those things culture our awareness, it's cultural integrity, but it's about having a healthy relationship with them, being able to see beyond the limitations of our own lives, while at the same time using or being fed by the healthy component of the boxes we're living in, if you want to put it that way. So I hope this is good food for thought for everyone. I hope I didn't push too many buttons. I tried not to. And we'll just talk to you again next week on Ancient Secrets Revealed. Thanks for listening.